that comes back to them as a company. They get far much more productivity. They get happier workers. People stick around longer because they're investing in people far beyond the horizon of whatever that particular job is.
Don't conduct your analysis in isolation because data is so incredibly powerful.
Not defending just the tribe, but defending the organization.
Those creative people that you really want to keep empowered, keep excited, keep motivated, keep thinking.
A good experience pays dividends down the line.
Stereotypes tend to break down in proximity.
Welcome to We're Only Human, a podcast about human resources, business, technology, and the workplace. My name is Ben Eubanks, your host, and I'm so glad you're here.
Hey everyone, Ben Eubanks here, host of We're Only Human, and so excited to have, one of my longtime friends, David Wentworth, here with me. He's at Schoox. They do a lot of good work. He'll talk more about it, but I'll give him a shout out really quick. They're great at employee development, training on the front line. That is their focus. They help those people perform better. And that is what they've really done a great job of doing over the last decade and building that out. And they have known you for quite a while back when we were researchers together. Now you're on the other side of the fence working at an incredible company. I'm so glad to have you here with me on the podcast.
Thank you so much. As a fellow human, I am very happy to be here. And yeah, it's great. We worked together briefly years ago. I don't even want to say how long ago because it hurts. But yeah, we've known each other for quite a while. And I love running into you at all the various events and having conversations. And now we're going to sort of do it in a professional way. So yeah, looking forward to it.
Okay. You said professional. Please don't set the expectation too high for the audience.
Right.
We don't want to ruin anything. So we'll semi-professional. We've got it going on. So really quickly, before we get into some of the fun stuff we're going to talk about today, about some of the research we're going to cover, tell the audience more about who you are and what you do, please.
Sure thing. So currently, I am the talent platform evangelist at Schoox. We are an LMS platform, as Ben was mentioning earlier on, and we do a very big focus on full-blown talent development, right? Not just learning, not just training, but the entire suite of talent development. And Ben, as you mentioned, we do have a pretty strong presence in that frontline world, retail, restaurants, hospitality, all that. But we do many others as well. But I've been with Schoox now just a little over a year. Prior to that, I spent about 11 years as L&D research practice leader for Brandon Hall Group. And before that, I was doing broader HR research at the Institute for Corporate Productivity. So I've been in the analyst world that Ben currently occupies for a very long time. And now on the other side of the coin.
Tremendous. And the most fun thing about, well, maybe not the most fun thing, but one of the things about you that I have always admired is when you're not talking about learning, helping employers think about that strategy behind it, really think about how to engage the workforce from a development perspective. You play in a band. Is that still true?
That is still true. I do.
Okay.
It is a fun hobby with some friends of mine, but I've been doing that for a very long time. I think one year Brandon Hall Group roped my band into playing at one of their events even. So, but yes.
I remember you sitting up there cranking out the drums. I'm like,
yeah.
This is it. Dave has arrived.
It's a crowning achievement of my HR career. So yes. But listen, we don't need to go back and forth on this, but I feel like that to me is ridiculously simple. You're the guy that gets up early and runs and hikes. And I remember how many children do you have now? Very many small children at the same time while you were doing all of this. So far more impressive to me, but
oh goodness. Well, as someone who has zero musical talent, that's what I appreciate. So, all right. So you and I are here today because recently we worked with the Schoox team on a piece of research around frontline worker development. How do we get them prepared for learning? What are the barriers that keep them from being effective at picking up new skills for their jobs? All of those kinds of things. And this is the thing that you and I both are very passionate about because number one, almost all of us listening in have had a frontline job at some point, usually early in our career. So we have some awareness and some appreciation and empathy for those people doing those jobs, but also because it is such a difficult and different type of animal compared to what it is for someone sitting in an office, sitting at a desk, how they learn, how they develop skills. It's just a very different sort of approach. So I'm going to start us off with some big questions. We'll kick this around and give the audience some good ideas and takeaways and things from the research, because I think there are some ideas. If any of you out there have people that are present at a job, and they have to be to do their work, they're going to have the problems we're talking about today. And we're going to give you some ideas, suggestions, and points based on data on how to fix that. So to kick us off, Dave, what are the biggest pain points for frontline workers when it comes to learning?
Well, I mean, There's so many. I think the first thing that comes to mind is just a broader observation is that in the work that I've done in the past, the work that you do, and you can agree or disagree with me, but I feel like analysts and the industry as a whole, L&D as a whole, we tend to default to that person that you described, the sort of white collar sitting at a desk in a building 9 to 5, whenever we think about the concepts of learning at work and what work really is. And we sort of default to that position. These are the people we're talking about. When research says 80% of organizations, that word organization brings to mind a bunch of people sitting at desks, sitting in meetings, doing these things. But really, that's sort of like the easiest audience in the world for all of this stuff. That's like the least resistance there is. And meanwhile, groups like retail workers, frontline, these deskless workers, manufacturing, they sort of get brushed off as, well, that's just training and it's high turnover, so we don't have to pay as much attention. But to me, it's like these are the audiences that need the most focus. It's the most challenging because they have all the same issues that the other audiences have. But on top of it, they are deskless, they are dispersed, they are typically younger, and it's very fast paced. So I feel like if you can solve all of those challenges, the other challenges sort of almost become secondary. So on the one sense, I think one of the biggest challenges is that the deck almost seems stacked against these particular audiences from the get-go. Now, in a practical sense, doing the job, I think just in describing it, the challenges become pretty apparent, right? Is that they don't have this opportunity to have set time for specific kinds of learning and training because they are deskless. But they also, it's sort of trial by fire, right? If you're coming into a lot of these jobs, and if the learning is sort of onboarding when you first get on, you're learning the entire job. Right? You're learning it from A to Z, not just, I always use the example, if you're hiring a software developer, that person knows how to develop software when they walk in the door. If you're hiring somebody for a retail chain, a restaurant, chances are they maybe haven't worked in that environment before, and they have to learn the entire thing in a short amount of time. So that's also a big challenge. And I think you'll probably bring this up too, but we saw it in the research, but you can see it just from talking to folks is, if you're doing a good job of teaching them the skills they need, they don't really get a chance to actually practice that before they're put to the test. And I think that's super challenging.
Yes.
So those are the ones that I think of.
I'll say that was one of the big ones that we saw in there, especially for people who are new in their jobs, was the biggest challenge they told us was, I don't have time to practice all these things you've taught me. You're going through this training, you got an instructor, they're walking me through these things, or I'm taking a course or a piece of content as I'm in my early days. But the hardest part is no one says, okay, let's let you wait this table before you actually do it. Or let's let you test what it's like to do this thing in a retail capacity before you actually have to do it in front of a customer. You're like, nope, you've been trained and now you're live. And it's like, we just flip the switch and throw you in and hope for the best. And that creates a lot of stress, a lot of difficulty for us workers.
Yeah. I mean, you're dealing with a very high turnover environment. And I think a lot of people just resign to the fact that, well, it's just high turnover. That's just how it is. But wouldn't you like to at least try to reduce that? And if you think about it, if you're trying a new skill and you fail, but you fail at practice versus you fail in the moment, how you internalize that, how you feel about that, and how you carry on from that is a lot different, right? So now you've already created this environment where someone's like, I'm not really thrilled about this experience. I'm not having a good time. I don't feel supported. I don't want to be here. And we sort of accept that as the default position for some of these frontline roles of, well, most of these folks don't want to be here in the first place, which is crazy. Like, why don't we make it a place that they want to be, and let's help and support? So, and I know it's easy to talk about these things theoretically, as you and I do, because we're not running a store, we're not running a restaurant. We understand that there's other parameters and variables, and it is hard to figure out how to allow practice to happen. But I feel like it's a valid effort to try to figure it out, right? Because the payoff of your people are just going to perform better. They're just going to be better at what they do. They're probably going to be happier about it. And in the long run, that's going to save whatever cost there is in carving out that practice time, I feel like would be covered completely and then some.
Yes. Okay. So we talked about practice. The number one, we actually skipped over. The number one thing that frontline workers told us in the research when we surveyed them that was a challenge when it comes to learning a new skill was actually time constraints, conflicting work schedules. I'm trying to fit all these things together, and I don't have time to pick up this new skill, even though I know that I probably have this gap, this deficiency. I'm not able to perform my work fully without asking questions or running into challenges. And yet I don't have the physical time to actually go and learn this new skill. And that's the number one reason that both workers and employers told us blocks frontline workers from picking that up. So that's a big priority. And again, just like you said, Dave, like we know that it's not as simple as, well, let's snap our fingers and just create some more time for them. That doesn't happen. It's not that easy to do. But if we're thinking about how we structure things, that does matter. I worked with a company recently and they completely redid their onboarding because they had done almost everything in a synchronous, we're all doing this as a group, cohort sort of thing. And the way they played it out, it took a couple of days to get all the training to their new people. And they started looking at that and realized, you know what? Instead of sticking them here all this time and just unplugging them from work, let's give them little pieces of this. Some of this can be done asynchronously. Let's bucket this stuff so that the similar content is at similar times. And they reduced the amount of time people had to spend onboarding and sped up the time to get them into the workforce, into the workflow, letting them actually put their hands on the job and get to work instead of keeping them out of that for a period of time. So there's some things like that where it comes to let's redefine, redesign how we're doing some of these things to get them up to speed quickly. And that may help us to overcome that a little bit, at least in the early days for people when it comes to getting them in. Anything else you want to share on the time constraints, the work schedules piece?
Well, yeah, I mean, we have to be honest with ourselves, right? We're talking almost completely about hourly employees, right? So every minute is accounted for as a cost in some way. So that mindset makes it difficult for a business owner, a leader to make that carve out because that's just how they have to think about these things. But it really does take a full-blown mind shift to realize that, okay, but the future hours that you are getting from these employees will carry far more value if you're willing to afford some of those hours earlier on to better learning experiences. It's just a really hard shift to make because they're almost on a daily basis dealing with these numbers, the P&L and the shifts. And look, I mean, I go to enough restaurant-focused industry events. There's a real concern in that industry of the minimum wage increases, and that's just added an additional pressure to them. I don't see that as either an excuse or a reason not to do these things, but it's an additional pressure on these things that they feel. So it's a very hard conversation to have. You'll have L&D professionals in these organizations that get it. They really get the things that we're talking about. They are 100% into it. You just can't roll that rock all the way over the hill with the leaders of the business because they're looking at it, and just by design, a little bit more myopically than everyone else, I would say.
Yes. One thing I meant to do at the beginning, and that this might help a little bit as well in this bigger conversation, is we're talking about these things like training, like it's its own thing, like it exists in a vacuum. But the ultimate goal, Dave and I both believe this, the ultimate goal of training is performance. We need to be developing people so they can perform and do their work well. And one of the things we saw in the research is when someone told us, when a worker said, my company gives me the right types and the right amounts of training, they were more than twice as likely to say, I know what the expectations are for me at the job. I know what my leaders want me to do, my performance. Like they don't understand all those things with great clarity. But when they don't have the right development tools behind them, the right training around them, they're a lot more likely to say, I'm not quite sure what good looks like here. I'm not sure exactly what they want from me. And that impacts performance at the end of the day. So you were talking about like every dollar is accounted for, this impacts the bottom line, all those things. That's what I come back to is this isn't training for its own sake. It's not training for fun. It's training for performance and impact. And if we're giving this conversation around development the right weight and the right rigor that it needs, we're going to start to see the outcomes when it comes to performance and how they're serving customers and how they're building product and manufacturing capacity and quality and retention and all other sorts of metrics that do matter at a higher level to the business.
Yeah. I mean, I look at organizations that we at Schoox have worked with and others that I've talked to. And when I come across someone in this industry that really does get it and is doing it, you can just see the difference. And so I think there's another mindset in there is because it is a relatively high turnover environment for most of these kinds of companies on that front line, the thinking is also, well, we'll only invest as much as we need to develop somebody because they're just going to leave. This is a first job or a stepping stone, or even if this is what they're going to be doing, they don't need much more development beyond this. When I come across companies that have recognized no, that's not the case. In fact, we need to invest more development in people, not only for the role that they currently have, but any roles that they might want in the future or anything outside of what we do, right? Like outside of our company, there's a few, and I know there's plenty that do this, but that I've specifically worked with. And I'll throw one because I just did a presentation with them, Hooters of America. And I know it comes across when you don't know the story, it seems like, really? But this is an organization that has really invested in developing their frontline workers. And there's all these programs for the wait staff to do whatever it is that they want to do, whether in the organization. And this Cheryl, who was their chief people officer, just this long list of high up executives and leaders throughout the organization that started in the restaurants, and then others that went on to do other great things outside, whether it's politics or science or medicine, because they were supported and developed by the staff with Hooters, and they were given opportunities for furthering their education. That comes back to them as a company. They get far much more productivity. They get happier workers. People stick around longer because they're investing in people far beyond the horizon of whatever that particular job is. And I've seen it at others that we've worked with. But if you can just pick your head up far enough to see a little bit past the horizon of this particular frontline job that you're trying to train for, you can develop and garner far more benefits, I think.
Yeah, I'm thinking about some of the other companies I know in that world, like more of the quick service restaurants, things like that, where you see some of the same kind of things play out. They incentivize the development of their frontline. They incentivize the growth within the business. They prioritize. One of the stories I used to tell that I love to share is Chipotle had this terrible turnover problem a couple of years ago, as most restaurants do. And they made one change that dropped that turnover by almost half overnight. And that one change was, we will never hire a manager for a store from outside the business again. We're going to grow someone who's already here and lift them up into this role because they already know the customers. They know our process. They know our culture. They know the rest of the team. We're not trying to bring someone in and get them reset on all of those things. And they said, listen, it's too costly from a business perspective to keep turning over the person who manages the team schedules, who deals with the big customer problems, who manages the inventory. It's too costly to do that. And so we need to find a way to address it. And they've leaned in there. And it was funny because I mentioned that at an event last year. And one of the heads of HR for White Castle, the restaurant chain, came out and said, we do that too. I'm like, well, I'll give you a shout out next time. So this is my chance to give White Castle a shout out for the same reason, but really leaning in, looking at developing those people. I'm glad you called that one out because that's one of the things that honestly shocked me a little bit, Dave, in the research is when we asked workers within the frontline space, would you rather be developed to take a job inside your organization or be developed to take a job outside your company? There was a considerable amount of interest to say, I want to stay here if the opportunity is here. If the opportunity presents itself, I'd love to stay in this organization and excel and be great. But all the work we're doing from a development perspective is not always clear to them. They don't always see the paths. And so that was one of the things that was surprising to me, but also a little bit of okay, we've got to do a better job of making sure to make those transparent what the opportunities happen to be, because if they don't know, they can't opt in to take on.
Exactly. Yeah. Another great example of Sonesta hotels, right? They have a bunch of different hotel brands all over the world. And right from the get-go, when you're hired, they present you with, I think it's something like 24 or more career paths. Like, look, here's your job today. This is what we're going to start with, but you can go in any direction. It's up to you. And from the get-go, they realized that these are possible. And if you want to follow them, they will support you and show you how to get there. And I think the one interesting thing about all of this too, is the companies that are really good at this and looking at the future and supporting and developing, they also recognize that there is a significant portion of this population that doesn't necessarily need that they're there for the job that they have and they're happy or content or whatever it is. And we have to recognize that and not make it seem as though if you don't pursue some of these development opportunities, then that's somehow a negative and that's bad. And we're not going to support you, or you don't have support because you're not trying to grow and be something. So being able to balance that where you're like, listen, if whatever the future you think holds for you, we will help you. And if you just need to get through this, we're going to support you there too. I hear it time and time again. There's like Sport Clips is very careful whenever they talk about their stylist. They never say just a stylist, because that's a very easy thing to default to, right? When you start talking about these, oh, you could be an executive here, you could be a leader here, a manager here. But if you want to be just a stylist, they don't say that because that is enough. It isn't a just. This is something that you've become very good at, and this is what you want to pursue. So it's being able to balance that, I think, is a critical thing that also gets missed, maybe sometimes in the fervor to get to the things that you and I are talking about. Yes. Well, I talked to the CHRO for Baylor University recently, and one of the things that she said that floored me, but it's so true, but it was just so powerful, is there is great dignity and value in someone saying, I know enough about myself that I would not be a great manager, but I want to be a great subject matter expert, an individual contributor. And we should celebrate that when someone says that. We shouldn't say, oh, right. And that's exactly what you're talking about there. Like, just a stylist? No, like, heck no, I don't have the skills personally to be a stylist. I don't have that ability to do that. So someone can, I respect them highly because they have some ability to do something
and make someone look incredible. And I don't have that at all. So we should never look down on those things. That's one of the other parts of the frontline conversation that sometimes feels a little strange, because all of us have been to a grocery store, have eaten in a restaurant, have whatever. Mm-hmm. We see that side, the consumer side of it, and think, well, it seems pretty simple to do that job over there. And if you've never actually done that job, you may not realize they had to be here 6 hours to get this thing ready that you're seeing the end result of right now in front of you. It looked like it took them 10 minutes, and now they've been preparing for all of this time, or getting these things ready. So we don't see all of the work they're doing behind the scenes. I think that's true in a lot of cases, but some of the things about Frontline, especially because we interact with them as consumers all the time, and we miss out on all the things that led to that exact moment of delivery.
Listen, I feel like if you put us together, the decades of research and presentations and webinars and things that we've done, put it all together, it all pales in comparison to one experience working in one of these environments at some point in your life. It teaches you so many things about what you want, what you don't want, how to treat people, how people get treated. It's vastly important. And I think that's one of the issues too, is you get to folks like my age and older who are making a lot of the decisions that are being made, maybe either didn't have that experience or had it so long ago that they are in that mindset of, oh, it's a young person's first job, temporary. Let's just treat it that way. But I mean, like, again, going back to these events that I've been to, these industry focused events, like your average quick service, fast casual restaurant worker, the average age of the first time employees has crept up pretty remarkably over the years. And it's not teenagers by a long shot.
Yeah. My wife and I went out for our anniversary dinner the other night, and our server, if she wasn't 60, she was probably close. And she was absolutely incredible. So wonderful. But I was like, it was fun because she was just chatting a little bit like, oh, cool. Congrats on this year. Like, this is how many years I have. And I could connect with her in a different way than I could connect with someone who's 17, who's like, oh, cool. Congrats. It was just a different sort of interaction. So I love that. So we've talked about retail. We talked about food. We talked about, you get to a hospitality example there. I'll throw another one out there really quickly that just is a fun connection to me. I was talking to a leader. They're a nonprofit, but they're in construction, Habitat for Humanity, Philadelphia. I was talking to their head of HR the other day, and we were talking through some of the things that their organization's shifting a little bit because of some things that are going on in the area. Like, if all the space is bought up and you can't build a house for someone, well, what do you do as a company who builds houses for people? Yeah. So they're shifting to remodels on older homes. And she was talking about some of the skills of their people and how they develop them and how they're compensating them for those things. So I love all of the different ways and touch points that frontline workers are doing good work. And I was talking about construction specifically because I'm looking at the list in front of me. So for those of you out there listening, this research we've talked about so far, manufacturing, retail, hospitality, food and beverage, construction, those different spaces, those are the ones that we covered in this. And so we have some actual breakouts in the report we'll link in the show notes. If you want to see, well, I'm in this space, what specifically happens for my workers here? Or how do other companies like ours approach this problem? Because I want to see how we compare and stack up. So we have some of those specific breakouts in that report. I was also going to touch on one other thing, Dave. I did not want to forget. We talked recently on a webinar about this and talked about the importance of mobile as a tool for development, for communication, for really getting into the hands of workers. Would you talk about the significance of that for a minute? Because that was one of the other things that's covered in that research report. If an employer wants to hear more about the importance there, but anything you'd like to throw in there real quick to highlight or emphasize that?
Emphasize which?
On the mobile piece. Sorry, mobile training, mobile learning as a...
Sure. Yeah, it's been an interesting sort of come around where you go back a few years and mobile was the big thing just because the devices were the big thing. Mm-hmm. And then that sort of settled down and it didn't become as critical. And now it's just, to me, it's just a given, right? We live most of our lives on mobile devices. So it's just a given. But then, in this environment, if you're talking about deskless workers, you have to have this conversation. How are you meeting their needs? And I've seen it all. I've seen everything from there's a shared computer in the manager's office that everybody sits down and does their training on, or there are a handful of iPads and they pass them around, to using the actual point of sale system at the register to do it. All of these with varying levels of success. But I think what companies are learning more and more is that, look, the phones are there, they're in their hands. If you want to get information to somebody in the fastest, most relevant way possible, that's really the way to do it. And it's become this challenge of, okay, how do we then balance that with, we don't want people in the store, in the restaurant, on the shop floor, on their phones all the time? Right. So, okay, how do we make sure that they have access to what they need without the temptation or the distraction of having the phones handy? And then also, how do we manage it in a way, because these are, again, probably hourly employees, that we're not either incentivizing them or straight up requiring them to take training outside of their work hours because they can access it on their phone. We've seen companies get in trouble with that kind of thing in the past. So on the one hand, it's critically important that whatever knowledge, learning, information, experiences you want to provide, you've got some sort of mobile solution for that, if not all of it, a lot of it. And then, okay, then how do we make that balance? How do we make it work?
Excellent. Thank you I sprung that one on you a little bit, but I think that's such an important part of this bigger conversation where we talked about some of the challenges earlier, like how do we get in front of them? How do we get their time? Like one of the ways is don't make them go somewhere else. Let's bring it to them when we can. And I love, especially, even if you're like, maybe the training's hard to do, but communication as a way to put something into the hands of our people for safety reasons, for some announcement that's important. Some, hey, listen, the water main's out. We got to move over to this space, or don't use like any sort of thing. Just communicating with them so often is, well, someone stuck it up in the break room, so on a board, and I'm sure everybody has cycled through there and has read it and has signed off saying that they've read it. And we know that's silly to imagine and expect that. So there's a lot of value to putting things in people's hands and giving them a chance to consume it that way.
Yeah. I mean, a quick example of Sport Clips, they came to us and said, look, we use the platform for our learning and everything, but we've actually realized it's our best tool for communication. They just use the platform for all their communication because we know people are there, we know they're in there, and we know we can reach them and we can push if we need to, or they can access if they want to. And it keeps that, like you said, from having some separate environment that they have to go to get important information. And again, it's something that's almost subliminal in that way, but that's something that you touched on earlier, is it makes the whole learning experience part of the actual, just the job, right? Like this is just what I do to do my job. Part of that is take this communication part of it is the learning, the training, but it's all part of the job. It's not separate. I don't have to feel as though I'm outside of my work parameters to try to learn this thing.
I'm flashing back. I talked to one of the HR executives for Hawaiian Brothers, the restaurant chain, and they were talking about how they have competitions and things on mobile for some of their frontline employees just to get them engaged, just to get them doing something fun in front of and for customers, to make because their atmosphere is sort of tied into that and how they interact with customers at their stores. And so there's lots of things, whether it's directly like them, this is a fun thing, whether it's straight nuts and bolts, we got to share communications, or it's something broader on how we're doing training. Any sort of mobile piece is important there. All right. So Dave, if someone wants to know more about Schoox and the great work the team is doing, I've already mentioned, I think that I'll drop the link to this actual report, some of the research you and I have talked through, and a lot more than we even had time to cover here. I'll drop that into the show notes. But if someone wants to learn more about Schoox and the work the team is doing there, what's the best way to connect?
I mean, clearly the website, schoox.com, that's schoox.com. It's like school with an X, but you go there and you can learn all about us. And there's plenty of great case studies, all these different types of industries. You can see how they're approaching learning in these ways. Obviously, Ben, you said you'd connect to the report. We also have links to that report and others on our site. You can also follow us on LinkedIn. We're pretty active and make sure that everyone's aware of what we're doing. You can also follow me or connect with me on LinkedIn, and you can directly ask me any questions you want. I'd be happy to do that too.
Perfect. Awesome. I was glad you mentioned yourself there. I was like, after someone listens to you here, they're probably like, Dave probably knows what he's talking about. He's got a little bit of stuff, a little bit of insight here after the years of research and chances to interact with these companies. And now being, again, on the side with Schoox, they are being able to talk to and support and work alongside so many incredible organizations in the work that they're doing. I remember the first time I saw the Sport Clips story and some of their case study, and was just super impressed with the approach the company's taken and their culture and some of those kind of things. And that is one of the things that I see. If you're one of those organizations that really, truly invests in and cares about your frontline workforce, that seems to be the kind of company that Schoox attracts overall. So it's a really cool sort of culture fit and connection there. So tremendous. Dave, always great to talk to you. Appreciate and respect the work that you do as always. And thankful that I had time to listen with you and learn with you and share as well.
Listen, completely reciprocal there. I feel exactly the same way. So thank you so much. And I'm glad we got to connect, and looking forward to seeing you in person at whatever the next thing is.
Cannot wait. Should be a blast. To everybody else out there, thanks for joining us today. Go out there, develop your frontline workers, help them perform better, and we'll catch you again next time on We're Only Human.
Thank you so much for joining me on the show today. I'm honored to have you as a listener. If you enjoyed this episode, please take 10 seconds to rate it at iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to your podcast. Also, if you know a friend that could benefit from today's conversation, please please pass it their way. After all, a rising tide lifts all ships. To see show notes, sponsor information, and our full show archives, visit onlyhumanshow.com.